Pederasty, an integration of empirical, historical, sociological, cross-cultural, cross-species, and evolutionary evidence and perspectives, by Bruce Rind. Introduction. Pederasty, defined as sexual relations between men and adolescent boys, is severely condemned in our society. It's generally seen as just another type of child sexual abuse with equivalent effects. In particular, it is widely assumed to be a highly dysfunctional interaction between a youth and a man, intrinsically traumatizing and damaging for the former and a reflection of severe pathology and dangerousness in the case of the latter. This thinking is strongly emotionally held and culturally entrenched, and to challenge it is to invite disbelief and attack. Yet, from a scholarly and scientific point of view, there is substantial basis for such challenge. In many other cultures across time and place, pederasty was viewed as functional. Youth's successful development was attributed to the practice, and men's disposition for the behavior was considered normal and even noble. In our own society, substantial empirical evidence shows that positive response on the part of the youth does occur and is not uncommon. Finally, cross-species evidence suggests that pederasty has an evolved basis because it is common in primates and a variety of subprimate species. In 2005, in an invited article written for the Journal of Homosexuality, I provided a brief sketch discussing these points. The article was attacked by a right-wing website, whereupon the publisher quickly censored the article before it was put into print. But the censoring came as well from pressure exerted by left-leaning personnel connected with other scholarly or scientific journals, which the publisher also published. Attacks from like-thinking colleagues in my own department at the university followed, in which the article was described as beyond the pale, even while academic freedom was reaffirmed as a sacred value. As anti-censorship counterattacks by other scholars mounted, the publisher eventually agreed to publish a revised, more detailed article by me. When the article was completed in 2009, the new publisher of the Journal of Homosexuality refused to publish it, declining to say why, despite repeated requests, except to assert that its decision was one of judgment, not censorship. The politically charged atmosphere surrounding the censoring of these articles is a blot on the scientific enterprise and on scientific publishing. The articles were descriptive and explanatory, not prescriptive. They were scholarly, drawing upon widely diverse academic sources, including many articles in previous volumes of the Journal of Homosexuality. The current chapter was devised not merely to publish the suppressed evidence and conclusions, but to oppose censorship that stems from panic or political correctness. Such censorship corrupts any science topic it touches. Caveats. The study presented in this chapter, as well as the previous two versions, deals with functional explanations for pederasty. This approach follows not only the evidence but previous scholarship, where such explanations have already been introduced. Offering functional explanations for pederasty can prompt people to write them off as advocacy for the behavior rather than valid science. This is what happened in response to the first version of the current study. It's important to emphasize, however, that functional explanation falls in the domain of science, advocacy falls in the domain of politics, and the two are distinct and have no necessary connection. For example, Zeitzen, 2008, reviewed polygamy from a cross-cultural perspective, and documented that its frequent practice in many other cultures was functional under the circumstances of those cultures. Gatt, 2006, reviewed war from zoological, historical, anthropological, and evolutionary perspectives and concluded that, in humans, it has an evolved adaptive function. Neither author was advocating the behavior for our society, but each was offering a functional explanation for an age-old phenomenon to improve scientific understanding relative to earlier explanations that were inadequate in part because they were explicitly or implicitly tied to prevailing values and morals. The same applies to functional explanations for pederasty. It is an age-old phenomenon. Much evidence indicates that it has been functional within particular cultural settings, which suggests that function is an element of its nature. This conclusion takes us beyond moral discourse to improve our objective understanding of the behavior. But the conclusion is not an advocacy for the behavior in our society, whose cultural setting is very different. To clarify these points further, it is useful to consider three fallacies discussed by Cardoso and Werner, 2004. The naturalist fallacy is showing that a behavior occurs in other species and concluding that it is, therefore, moral for humans. The relativistic fallacy cites a behavior's occurrence in other cultures as morally acceptable and then concludes that it, therefore, should be moral in ours. The moralistic fallacy is the reverse of the naturalistic fallacy in that it derives what is from what ought to be, but frequently in contradiction to what actually is. Accordingly, it would be fallacious to show that pederasty is commonplace in other species and other cultures and to conclude that it should be seen as moral in our society, naturalistic and relativistic fallacies. On the other hand, it's no less fallacious to begin with the fact that pederasty is seen as immoral in our society and then to read into it all sorts of pathologies that may well not be objectively true, moralistic fallacy. For practical purposes, our society is currently so vehemently opposed to pederasty that there is little chance that it could be influenced into changing its attitudes, values, or practices regarding this behavior by arguments committing the naturalistic or relativistic fallacies. On the other hand, the moralistic fallacy is a serious problem because it has had a dominating biasing impact on scientific understanding of pederasty as discussed later, which is an important rationale for this study.